Ian.
Dave.
We have a guest on the show, Ian. It's not just you and I tonight.
I know. Another person has been lured in.
Yes.
Steve Edwards has joined us. Thank you for coming on.
Howdy. Thank you.
So Steve came to us by way of our mutual friend, David Obuchowski. All right. And so, Steve, you edit and manage the blog at overland.com. I'm just taking
Overlander.
a run.
Yeah.
Overlander.com.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're a freelance automotive writer. You recently secured a job in Denver, but there's like a whole bunch more to the story, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we want to hear it all tonight. Like, let's do it. If you feel like at any point you want to swipe your credit card for a therapy copay, you're welcome to do that.
Sounds great.
Take any tangent you want. Let's get into it. Yeah. So how do you know David? How did you meet David?
That in and of itself is a pretty interesting story. So I think this is a realm that you guys are familiar with. There's a little corner of Twitter that we affectionately call Weird Car Twitter.
Absolutely.
And it's this group of people who just spend their time, maybe most of their day, like I do, looking at strange cars and making jokes about weird cars all over the internet. But sometimes things get a little more serious, I think. And this is kind of how I intersected with David. So I knew David just as a Twitter acquaintance, and we kind of messaged back and forth here and there. But there was a period earlier this year, kind of earlier this summer, when I was, doing weird car Twitter things. I was posting a bunch of links to like interesting cars are for sale on my local Craigslist. My local Craigslist being northwestern Montana. So I live in Missoula, Montana.
Okay.
And one of those cars happened to be a 1989 Peugeot 405 MI16, which is a rare car in and of itself. But that particular model, the MI16, is sort of the hot rod Peugeot. Right. Very like classic late 80s, early 90s kind of sedan. And it was located about 100 miles north of me, just kind of in this little town in the middle of nowhere in Montana. And it was in perfect shape, just beautiful, beautiful car. So David had sort of responded to my Twitter post and said, "Wow, look at that Peugeot. Like that's my dream car." And it being weird car Twitter, you don't question that stuff, right? Right. Right. We're all a little weird, right? And so, you don't question people's taste, right? So I said, well, I'll go look at it for you if you want. I'd be happy to check it out. Just kind of thinking like, well, whatever, like he's not going to say yes. And so he messaged me, DM'd me and said, yes, like, would you mind? Would you mind like actually looking at this car for me? And so I said, well, yeah, let's do it. So, I hopped in my Land Rover and I drove 100 miles north of here. And, and I went to this house in the middle of the woods on this lake, like in the middle of nowhere. And there was this little white Peugeot sitting there. And I met this guy. He's really nice. Had a whole bunch of other like interesting cars in his garage. And he's just kind of looking to thin the herd a little bit. And so I test drove the car. I looked it over. I called David and said, hey, I think this is a great car. Like if this is really, the pinnacle of your automotive experience, I don't think you're going to find a better one, Okay. And he went back and forth with the owner and they negotiated a price, and it was a little touch and go because David had to sell his old car.
Right. His old Alpha.
Yeah, his old Alpha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So another weird car. And, but all the sort of interactions and transactions managed to work. And then, when the money changed hands, the owner brought the car down to Missoula and left it with me. Okay. And so I had the car for a couple days, and David and I made this sort of wild ass plan. He was like, look, let's make like an adventure out of this. And so he said, I'm going to fly to Montana and we're going to meet, and then we're going to drive the car together back to Colorado, and then we'll fly you back home. So, little American road trip across the West, right?
Yeah.
And of course, obviously I'd never met this guy before. He'd never met me. He sort of trusted my judgment. I don't know anything about French cars. I mean, I know quite a bit about cars, but
you guys got really lucky in that the stretch from Missoula, Montana down to Denver is known for just having Peugeot mechanics just like every 20 miles. Like you're going to be
services,
parts just on the side of the road wherever you need. They're on trees.
Yeah, exactly. So here I have this 30-year-old French car, and I brought it to a friend of mine who's a sort of foreign car mechanic, and we kind of looked it over, very sort of, kind of a basic level. Will it make it to Colorado? Like, will it go 1,000 miles? And the answer was yes. So, I hopped in the car and I drove to Bozeman, where I picked up David at the airport, and then we took 2 days to drive down to Denver.
That's so cool.
Stayed with this wonderful family for a night, and then I flew back home to Montana. So it's kind of this whirlwind experience. And, it's funny, like along the way, when you spend 10 hours, 12 hours in a car with somebody, you get a chance to know them, right? And like you have those kinds of particular conversations that you don't have anywhere else, right? Besides in a car on a road trip, right?
Those we're out of things to talk about conversations.
Yeah, right. Or even not. We're like age mates, right? We're like almost exactly the same age, and we have a lot in common. We just like a lot. He grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in Wyoming. We both had these different life experiences, but we're also like very similar in a lot of ways. And you just never know when you're going to make that connection.
It's like the early stages of a relationship, right? Like where you just want to talk to them about everything, right? And it's all good to hear and it's all good to say, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. So it was like one of the best things I did this year. I think especially after all the 18 months of social isolation and lack of adventure, and to say screw it, like I'm gonna take a flyer on this. Like who knows, he might be a serial killer, I don't know. I might be, right? And so we don't know. And it really, it was fantastic.
That's so cool.
Like I said, it's like one of the best things I did this year. It's fantastic.
I'm still blown away because I would have thought that the Venn diagram overlap of like French car weirdo and remote Montana weirdo there would be no intersection there whatsoever. The randomness of finding a clean Peugeot 405 that far afield, like that's so crazy. Yeah. Did he have
second owner? Yeah. Huh. All these like service records from when it was new.
A bunch of parts in the trunk too.
That
was a good side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just in immaculate condition. Like you open the door and it just it smelled new. The leather's perfect. The carpets have this nice deep shape. Pile. It's like, oh yeah, Dave, you've seen it, right? Yeah. You've seen many parts of it actually. But yeah, it's a beautiful car. I mean, and it was the minute I opened the door, when I got there, I was like, oh yeah, Dave's going to buy this car. It's David is going to buy this car.
Did you get any more on the story of the guy who had it? Because that seems
so he had a friend who also kind of lives in Northwest Montana, who's just like a car collector, basically. He's got 20 cars, huge garage, tons of different cars. And this guy actually, the original owner, has 2 Peugeot 405 Mi16s, or had. He had the white one, and he still has a red one.
Wow.
And he bought the white one brand new in Portland, Oregon, in 1990, at the very end of Peugeot in the United States, right? I mean, that was
the end,
the last gasp, right?
Yeah. Clearing out the inventory.
So exactly. So the guy that David bought it from his friend. And, I think when I went to go see it, I think still less than 100,000 miles on it.
Wow.
But, it had been like meticulously maintained throughout that time. And, the guy that David bought it from also had a whole bunch of cars. He had like RX-7s and Beetles and a Chevy C10 pickup and like all these kind of interesting cars. And I think one of the things that the seller told me was that he had a promise from his friend that if he was ever going to sell the red 405, that he would be the guy that he would buy it. So he didn't feel too bad about letting the white one go, knowing that there's another, 1989 405 MI16 hanging around. So yeah, you never know where these things take you, right? Where you meet these like automotive enthusiasts with,
right.
interesting or questionable tastes, however you want to interpret it.
Right. I think some of the through lines of weird car Twitter, like some of the recurring themes that like I kind of keep seeing popping up, and we're very thankful to be part of weird car Twitter, is that like favors for other people, right? Just incredible niceness, charity, hospitality, like and just like fast friends, like all crazy adventures, like all of these things, like everything that like Victoria Scott's been going through and doing, like all of this like great stuff that like makes up the fabric of weird Twitter as being like solid people and like really fun cars and experiences and stuff like that. It's amazing to see.
Yeah, and I think also just like an openness too, right? And like lack of judgment, and just like thinking, hey, we're all a community in different colors and stripes, but we're all kind of have the same whatever,
same
like
set of problems,
short circuit in our brains, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like Victoria Scott, and then you guys have had Steph Schrader on the show.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know. A few years ago, I was at a used bookstore in Missoula, and I ran across a VW 411 Haynes manual, just like in the used bookstore. And I was oh, you know who needs this? Steph. So like I got on Twitter and I was like, hey, I found this manual. Do you want it? And so I just mailed it to her, right? It was like $3 at the used bookstore, right? Yeah, it's not the crazy adventure David and I had isn't the only time I've had a chance to, connect materially with other people in that realm. So, and then here we are, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. So
I want to interrupt really quick because something happened to me today in the real world in like meat space that I now know was a harbinger for this, like it was a good omen that we were going to have a good weird car Twitter conversation. I looked up from breakfast this morning to see 3 young men pushing a broken Saab down my street. And just with just like the most dejected look on their face that I've ever seen. And they were making really good progress. I would have helped them, but they were already they were going faster than I think they probably would if it was running.
Like they ran out first gear.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then, there's also just like, so Dave, like one of my favorite cars in my past is a 1997 Saab 900 SE Turbo Coupe. So like
my first.
And you
Saab.
Had the exact same car, right?
Yeah, mine was the 5-door. Yeah, but yeah.
Oh, you had the 5-door. Okay. Yeah.
Dusty Rusty is what I called it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You also had a 3-door too.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had 3 Saabs. I've had 2 3-doors and a 5-door. Yeah, one never ran. Right. One ran. Like Ian drove Dusty Rusty. He drove the Vigan too. But yeah, anyway, they're fantastic. So we have a shared Saab history, right?
Exactly. Right.
Also, for anybody that's only listening to the audio, I would like to call it the fact that you have an open hood of a car literally right behind you right now.
Oh yeah, so I can do this. I'm replacing the valve seals on my CRV.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is and then I have a M10 4-cylinder out of a BMW 2002 sitting on a engine
awesome.
stand there.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, I got my projects going here.
So like, what was your entry into like turning wrenches, like cars? Like, give me like, what was your car puberty? Like,
Yeah, like that. I think like for a lot of people, my sort of entry into the car world is through a Volkswagen Beetle.
okay.
And my parents had Beetles for many years. My dad commuted in one for many years, and I still own one of the family Beetles. My grandfather bought it brand new in 1971.
What?
It's parked outside and still sitting there. And so that's been the through line for me. And obviously, they're cartoon cars, right? And they're super simple and they're overtly mechanical. And, I was just fascinated by them, from a very, very, very early age. And, being what they were, I think, my dad was always, doing the maintenance, right? Like you're supposed to do with, older cars, because that's how they run. Right. And, so he was always changing the oil and studying the valves and, doing all that stuff. Right. And so there was just a lot of like osmosis there. And, and I think I think it's that very common thing that happens where, I got a million Hot Wheels and, like I had, couldn't wait to drive. Right. Right. I'd sit in the garage, and like move the gear shifter around and yeah. And then, the Beetle was my first car and again, it was very specific in terms of, my family saying like, look, if you're going to drive this thing, you have to, maintain it. Right. And so sort of learning that stuff organically, I think it's only, interestingly enough, I think it's only later in life that I really sort of came into maybe my more, mechanical talents. I came from a family, it was very much, you go to college, right? You're going to go get a degree, you're going to go get a job, you're going to,
make something, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I took a path, through college and into academia and went to grad school and stuff. And I was always like into cars. I was doing a lot, I had all kinds of fun cars over the years, like GTI VR6s and Saabs and R53 minis and did a lot of autocross and, like I was always like engaged. Right. But it was always just a kind of a hobby, right. Or something on the side. And it wasn't until later when I really started, I guess, to like lean into, being a car person.
Yeah.
Right. And, now I guess, I don't know, whatever, call it a second act or whatever, but, at 43 years old, I've, completely shifted my entire, being, right. Into, a life that's like full of automobiles, but in more meaningful ways maybe than it was in the past. So yeah, I think it's the early arc is, I think, fairly typical, right? A mechanically inclined father, mechanically simple cars around the house, that kind of stuff, right? Car and driver and road and track on the coffee table and hot VWs and dune buggies, right? The publication of record for air-cooled Volkswagens.
Right.
So
has it changed?
How did that work then?
5 decades.
Yeah, right. When when your life sort of took you away from cars, like you said, you kind of stayed engaged with it and stuff. Like, in academia, did the people that you were with in that part of your life, did they get what you're doing now, or was it always like a weird thing that Steve does this stuff on the weekend, or how did that work usually?
Yeah, it was definitely a light I kept under a bushel for a long time. I think especially in an academic context, it's just, I guess, in most parts of that world, it's not something that people understand, I think.
Sure.
It's a very sort of, it's not really, ivory towers don't have garages, right? I guess maybe was what we can say. And so, like, a lot of it was, I was talking to my wife, Julie, about this a little while ago, but it was always something I was a little bit like, I don't know, afraid of or ashamed of, or, just didn't talk very much about, like, in my professional context. Like, and I actually tried when I was in graduate school. I kind of half floated an idea for a research project where I did part of my graduate work in anthropology. I was curious about, like, car culture, right? Oh. Like, how do people create community? How do people create relationships and, create identity right through their vehicles or their cars or their trucks or motorcycles or whatever? Because these are real things, right? These are, like, real, tangible, whether it's like weird car Twitter, in a virtual space, or whether it's, the local, whatever, cars and coffee, right? Where you're in a, very, like, real, tangible space. Like, there's culture going on there, right? There's relationships, there's community, there's identity that's being built. And I sort of tentatively floated this idea to one of my advisors, like, hey, this is something I'd love to do. Maybe I could, embed myself in a car club, or, like, learn about, whatever, like, fringe automotive culture. Maybe it's lowriders, maybe it's whatever, air-cooled, buses or whatever. And that was just sort of dismissed out of hand, right? Like, it's not a serious topic, right? That's not a serious thing, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
yeah, well,
yeah.
Right.
I think all of us have been in those situations too, where, we're like, well, let's maybe not talk about cars today, or what, like, where you kind of read the room and you're like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to bring that up here.
Right.
But the thing you were talking about with the anthropology angle is really interesting to me too, because, like, we're especially now where we're in this moment where we're kind of examining, like, how like commuter culture, especially, and, like, building of highways, stuff like that, has, like, impacted communities, and especially people of color, and all that sort of stuff and then, like, but the community, the car culture part that you're talking about was sort of like a happy accident of all of that, right? Like, lowrider culture and donks and all that stuff those are car cultures that came out of the time and place where they existed, and they were only there because of these other decisions that were made, where they were made for bad reasons, but then this good thing kind of came out of it. And then we had Chris Rosales on a few months ago.
Oh yeah.
From the Drive, and he had written a story about this exact thing, where kind of proving your point that this is important, because there was basically, like, a new condo went up across the street from where there was a monthly or weekly lowrider show, and it caused, like, a big thing in the community.
I remember this article. Like, he was sort of focused on gentrification, right? And
absolutely.
sort of impacts on. I do remember this article. Yeah.
Also, I think that, like, the academia, or maybe kind of like upper crust perspective of cars and car culture is not necessarily that culture aspect. It's probably viewed as, like, another house, like, this is a status symbol, it's another kind of physical property, like, it's another acquisition, right? And a thing that kind of shows your status, versus, like, a thing from which culture is born, or an expression of self, or things like that, right? Like, it's completely a different lens.
And it's also, too, sort of this implication that, if you have a focus on the automobile or focus on cars, like, it's not part of sort of the life of the mind, right?
Right.
It's something completely different and outside of that. And, and not to say, like, there's been some really amazing, like, academic work done about this stuff. There's, but, a lot of it is in the sort of, it's over in the business school, right? Not in the humanities, not necessarily in social sciences, but there has been some really good, like, academic work, but it's probably untapped in a lot of ways. But, our modern life is filtered so much through the automobile, like in so many different ways. And I think, I'm biased, but I think there's space for digging into that, and I think, like you're saying, like Chris does a really great job. Chris Gonzalez does a really great job about, tapping into a lot of that. Victoria Scott, right? Like, I think she has an amazing sort of lens on, how car culture is changing, but also how it's kind of like weirdly staying the same. And, it's been, her work is so confessional and sort of highly personal, but I think it's really useful for understanding like how we all fit in this big weird world that's mediated through the automobile.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is definitely our language. Like, this is an obsession of ours that we've had since we started the show of like, trying to say that like car culture is culture, and also you can't but it also means you can't separate them, right? You have to, they exist within each other, and you can't take politics out of cars. You can't take culture out of cars. It's all wrapped up. We're all swimming in the same stew.
Exactly. And it's super interesting, right? And, and it's fun to think about. It's fun to talk about. And I think it's important. So I have less compunction about talking openly about it, right? Or saying, very, out loud, like, I work on cars. I write about cars, like every day. So,
I think that's probably also just like a function of getting older, right? Of just like being, you're just more secure in who you are and all that sort of stuff. Cause I know like, I'm an IT guy, but I work around some like pretty intense IT people, like very, very intense IT people. And I am not that. Like I'm sort of ambivalent about computers in general.
When I first met Ian, he did not own a home computer, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind. Yeah.
I was in between computers.
Oh, okay. I was like,
well, I had a work.
You had a work computer, but you just torrented everything on your phone.
Anyway,
that's funny.
But so I would have that sort of same thing where I would tell people that I was going to race cars or I was fixing something on my car, and they would just look at me like I had like 3 heads. Like, what are you talking about?
Right. Like, what's a track day? Like, what is that? Right.
I had an IT director look at me and go, "What do you know about cars?" Like, very, very old wing-a-dinga, kind of guy, like C3 Corvette, Jeep Wrangler, lifted Jeep Wrangler kind of dude, right? But anyway,
fantastic.
I mean, you mentioned that, like, regular cars, I think, is another vector for understanding like car culture, right? Like Brian does this incredible job of like tapping into that. I think especially a lot of that like Gen X, millennial, borderline kind of, stuff, 80s and 90s cars, right? Which I think we all love. So that stuff is out there, and I think it has more of a voice now than it has in the past, and that's really cool.
Yeah. Definitely. Should we play a game real quick? This seems like a good break in the conversation.
Sure. Yeah, let's play a game, and then I want to hear about a trip across Africa.
Yes.
Let's talk about it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, I'll go. So this is a game we play on the show called FMK Cars. It's based on the classic game of Fuck, Marry, Kill, except we play it with cars instead of people because we're not gross. Right. And so F means you're going to drive it for a day. M means you marry it, it's your new daily driver. K means you kill it, it goes to the crusher. Okay. This is going to come with a twist. So the title of this one is, "Oh my God, my Land Rover leaked oil into the same fountain as my RX-7, and now I have sports cars with bad electrics and a truck with a leaky rear main seal. These are Freaky Friday cars and lifestyles." Okay. So they're going to leak oil into the same fountain, and then they're Freaky Fridaying. All right.
I love it.
Ian writes great titles.
All right. So the first one is a Mazda FD Rx7.
I'm gonna start sharing a browser so people can see what the cars look like. Okay, all
so
right.
it's you get the Mazda, but you have the lifestyle and car maintenance of a classic Range Rover owner. So for every 4 hours you spend driving the car, you spend at least 1 hour either fixing it or getting it fixed by somebody.
Okay.
All right. Next one. Lexus RX 350. You have the lifestyle of a Harley rider. You're going to be a Harley dad. $40 t-shirts, classic rock blaring at all times, and you bring up Sturgis constantly. All right. That's the second one. All right. The third one, last one, Ford Raptor. You've switched places with a Prius owner and are now a hyper-miler character from Portlandia. You also have all the associated bumper stickers and everything.
So I have hyper-miler bumper stickers on my Raptor?
Yes.
And I understand. Okay. Not like Raptor bumper stickers. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. I see. So I pick one vehicle that I drive for a day and never see again. One vehicle that ends up my daily.
Yep.
For the rest of my life, and the other goes to the yard.
Yes.
So I mean, the Fd Rx7 is like one of my absolute like top 5 cars ever.
Happy to ruin it for you.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, I basically do that every day with my Defender. Like, so I daily drive my Defender. So like, I'm used to this. Like, drive 4 hours, wrench 1 hour. Yeah. So, I'm definitely gonna marry the RX-7. Like,
okay,
without a doubt.
Nice. I like
you're
without
like,
a doubt. Like,
you're like Bane.
Like
I was born at the parts counter.
Yeah, right. I have a driveway littered with cars that need constant attention. So what's one more? And then if I get to drive an RX-7 all the time, that's
okay.
An easy choice. I think this is interesting. I think
you can either be a Harley dad for a day in a Lexus, or you can be a Prius, hyper-miler, and a Ford Raptor.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to send the Lexus just to the crusher. I can't understand it. I'm happy to I feel like I understand the Raptor, despite its many flaws. So yeah, I'll do the Raptor for a day and then send the Lexus packing.
Nice. Yeah. No problem.
I think you've chosen well, even though our resident Lexus owner over here.
Well,
yeah, I know.
To completely to have your back on this one, Steve, is that the RX only makes sense in 450 form. Like, that's it. Like, that's the only thing that makes that car good. When you have that drivetrain in that crossover, it actually becomes fun, even like in eco mode. Like, it's a good car. But any other instance or iteration of RX, garbage.
Yeah. Right. Well, it just sort of fades, right, into the background.
Yes. Yes.
Right. But how's the Abarth doing? Speaking of,
we're interviewing you, Steve.
Oh, sorry. That's no, a separate podcast.
I got the head back from the machine shop. I'm going to start working on it. It's going to start going back together, and I just got a new turbo for the Abarth in the mail today. So yeah.
Nice.
There we go.
All right.
Yep. Just in time for winter.
Exactly.
Right. That's a fun thing to get in the mail, though.
Right.
There's nothing like opening that box, right, and seeing a nice new turbo sitting there and all its potential.
My poor FedEx guy, he's had to carry like Rock Auto boxes full of brake rotors and, exhaust manifolds and turbos and like just heavy shit to my doorstep. So I need to buy this guy like a big fruit basket or something for Christmas. I don't know what I need to do, but
leave it on the porch.
Icy hot.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I got you Tiger Balm. Don't make it weird.
Right.
Yeah. So let's hear about Africa. You can include as much of the Toto song as you want. Go for it. Like,
you know what's cool? I mean, so a lot of this is going to rotate around our, like I mentioned, our Land Rover Defender. It's a 1992 two-door 110, so it's the van.
Let me reshare and show people what that looks like.
Yeah. It's 200 TDI turbo diesel. It started life as probably a plumber's van or some kind of work vehicle in the UK.
You said it was a 110?
Yeah, it was a two-door 110. So
okay.
Usually called the 110 van.
Okay.
So yeah, so that vehicle found its way to my wife Julie and I when we were living in Botswana. We lived there for a couple of years, 2017 through 2019, and this was sort of like, I think for both of us, for many people, I think living overseas marks like a big turning point in your life. Like, it's sort of, changes things. It's one thing to travel. It's another thing to like live somewhere, right? Totally out of context, totally different. We first went to Southern Africa in 2015. My wife Julie is was an academic. She still is a librarian. And she had a conference in Cape Town, South Africa. And, when we got word of the conference, we were like, oh, what we should do is let's make a vacation out of this. Like, let's both go, if we're going to go like 10,000 miles across the world, let's go see some of Africa, right? Like, it'd be dumb to go all the way to Cape Town and sit in a conference room for however long, right? So we planned about, 3 weeks or so as a vacation. And what we wanted to do is go do all the African things. Like, we wanted to go on safari and, like see the elephants and do all that stuff. Right. But when we started like digging into the research, it was impossible. Like, it was so expensive and it seemed like inaccessible. Right. And, we weren't quite sure what to do. It was like, well, we want to go, we want to see things, but we don't have the money to like spend, $2,000 or $3,000 a day or whatever on them, a fully catered safari experience. Right. So, we, again, sort of continued like to look around and, see what was out there. And I kind of stumbled on this, this option where you could go and you could rent a Toyota pickup truck with a rooftop tent on it and a fridge in the back. And you could get sort of like a rough plan, like a rough travel plan. They would provide you with sort of a route and some campsites, and you could do it yourself. So you could just like get in your, Toyota Hilux and take off into the, into the wilds of Botswana or Namibia or South Africa. So I came to Julie and I was like, look, here's an option. Like, here's a possibility. And I was like, we don't know anything about these countries. We haven't been to any of these places.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Right. And Julie was like, yeah, let's do it. Like, let's do this. So, and
hell yeah,
we're backpackers. Like, we've been, sort of bouncing around Montana and Utah and stuff in our Jeep. And, we'd been kind of, exploring around with 4x4s for a while. But this is the first sort of, I guess, quote unquote overland experience that we'd ever had. Right. And, so yeah, we flew to Windhoek, Namibia, picked up this truck and just like drove into the, wilderness. And, we had this little guide that the company made for us. And we showed up at our first campsite. And in the middle of the night, a giraffe came into our campsite. It was like eating the tree, like we had parked under. And that did it, right? It was like, whoa, like what is happening what is happening exactly right now? And so, and then we drove all over Namibia and Botswana. we saw all the animals we wanted to see, and we just had this amazing experience. And when we got home from that trip, Julie sat down and she's like, "We got to go back." And I said, "Yeah, we have to go back." And like that week that we returned, she applied for a Fulbright fellowship. The Fulbright fellowship is like an academic exchange program for professional academics and students, where scholars from the United States go to other countries and vice versa. Scholars from other countries come to the U.S., and it's sponsored by the State Department.
Wow. Okay.
And so she wrote a proposal, and some Fulbright scholars do research, some do teaching. And she wrote a proposal to go to Botswana, the University of Botswana, to teach future librarians how to be librarians. And she got accepted. So that was, like a year later. So in 2017, we packed up our lives, and my cousin moved into our house in Montana, and we left for Botswana. And we lived in the capital city, which is called Gaborone, and it's really close to the South African border. So Botswana is a landlocked country, and it's just north of South Africa. It's about the size of Texas, but it only has about 2.5 million people. So it's extremely sparsely populated.
Wow.
And it's just covered with thousands and thousands and thousands of miles of dirt roads, and these huge game reserves and national parks, with all these like amazing, wildlife. And so every chance we had, we were out in our truck, like driving around and camping and exploring, Botswana and South Africa, Namibia. And our first truck was a 1999 Mitsubishi Pajero. I think the trim level was Exceed. That was the trim, the Exceed. And it was that guy, right? Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was a great truck, a Japanese import. So Botswana is full of Japanese imports. They have very loose importation laws for vehicles. So there's a lot of really cool JDM stuff running around in Botswana, really cool stuff. So this was the truck. We bought it off another expat who was living there. And it was great for about a year until I blew up the head gaskets in the middle of nowhere. That was a really fun experience. So after that problem, we needed a new car, but we were really looking to have a bigger adventure, a bigger experience. And we were, kind of on the fence, and we got the Pajero repaired and it was working, but we knew we were going to kind of ditch it, right? And I had been kind of, I sort of mentioned all the cool cars running around Botswana, but I was just head over heels about 70 series Land Cruisers, right? And Land Rover Defenders, 110s and 90s, just running all over the place. And they're all it's all part of that off-road sort of culture in that part of the world, and just loved them, right? And I was like, let's get a Land Cruiser. Let's get a Land Cruiser. Let's find a cool 70 series Land Cruiser. Let's fit it out. Let's get the roof tent. Let's get the the whole 9 yards. And we had kind of fits and starts. And the problem with the Toyotas, right, is you have Toyota tax, right? They're just that much more expensive.
It's still even in Africa as well. The Toyota tax is a thing.
Yeah.
Just because they're completely bulletproof, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hiluxes, Land Cruisers. I mean, they're just Land Rovers used to be the truck in Africa. I mean, for years, and for obvious reasons, right? For years and years and years and years, all the militaries in these African countries had Land Rovers. It was just that was the truck, right? But then, starting in the late 80s, Toyota really started making these inroads. And one of the ways they did that was set up this massive dealer and parts network all over the continent.
Oh,
so the trucks themselves are, built for those conditions, right? They're overbuilt, and they last forever, and they're generally pretty simple, especially the diesels, right? And so once they started to like make those inroads in terms of selling those vehicles, and then the UN started having Land Cruisers and Toyotas all over, and so a lot of these international aid organizations were bringing in Toyotas, and with the like parts and like dealer support all over the continent, plus the fact that they just never die.
Sure.
Really started to like push the Land Rovers out of the.
Sure.
Land Rover kind of left Africa after a while, like as a company. So just wasn't the support there, but. Yeah, it's kind of an aside, but so I was like, we need a Land Cruiser, right? And so we looked at a couple different options and went back and forth. And there was one day I was sitting at home in the apartment and I was messing around on like an Overlanding Africa Facebook page, and I was scrolling down and I saw this Defender, this 110. And it was this couple, this American couple actually, who had been driving this Defender all around Africa. And they were ending their trip. They had like a 6-month trip. And they were ending their trip in Ethiopia. And they were looking to sell their Land Rover. And the price was like really good. So I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I was kind of looking at the photos and checking it out. And I was like, I just made a mental note. Like, I hadn't really thought about the Defender like in seriously, other than I thought they were like really cool, right? So I was kind of doing other things. I got this text from Julie, and she's like, "Hey," she's like, "Did you see that Defender on the Overlander on the like Overland Africa like Facebook page?" I was like, "Yeah, I did." She's like, "What do you think?" She's like, "Is that an option? Like, should we just buy that?" And I was like, "Whoa, I don't know." So I messaged the people, and they were like, so they sent me a ton of photos and video, and like we kind of went back and forth, and we arrived at a price. It was pretty reasonable. I forget what it was, $5,000, something like that. It was not very much considering the value like OG 110s have now. And we just made this this wild ass plan. Like we're gonna get on an airplane. We're gonna fly one way to a country we've never been to. We're gonna meet strangers from the internet, and we're gonna buy a car. And we're going to drive it back from Ethiopia all the way to Botswana.
How did that work with getting a car out of the country and then into another country? Because I know that is fraught sometimes, right?
So this is a little bit of a problem. And so it turned out that this 110 had this interesting history. So like I said, it started its life in the UK as like a work van. And so this couple from the UK bought it and they drove it all the way from England to South Africa. So they drove the entire like length of the African continent plus Europe.
Wow.
And then they sold the car to this American couple when they got to Cape Town. And then this other couple, they drove it from South Africa all the way to Ethiopia. So this truck had already done like a lap and a half of Africa, right? And it looked the part, like it was pretty rough, but it was also like it had been well taken care of, right? So like mechanically, it was pretty sound. So so we got on the airplane, we landed in Addis Ababa, we got to the like hotel, and there it was, like sitting in the hotel parking lot, like wow. Like we are actually here. We're going to do this, I guess, right? We're going to get in this car and drive back to Botswana. And it came with a roof tent. It came with a fridge. It came with like a water system with like a water tank and a filter and a pump with like a faucet and a solar panel and a dual battery system and like all of the, sort of basic like overlanding stuff that you need. And, I packed shock absorbers in my suitcase because they were kind of shot. So I bought the shock absorbers in Botswana and I brought them with me like on the airplane to Ethiopia. And
that's like a moment where like the seller is like, I wonder if he's serious about buying this thing. And then you like pull out some shock absorbers.
right. So we changed all the shocks in the parking lot. The hotel. It was great. So, Ian, your question is a good one, because one of the issues that we had, so the truck was still registered in the UK. So the UK has this like very loose sort of registration system. If you can sort of show like a mailing address in the UK, you can transfer the registration between like different people. So I put the word out again, like on Facebook. I was like, hey, any of our friends like in Britain, can we borrow your address so we can register this truck like in our name with your address? And so like a friend of a friend got a hold of us, like, oh yeah, no problem. Like, have it sent here. So we registered the car in our names in England. The registration paperwork came via DHL to Botswana, and we took it with us to Ethiopia. So we could actually say that like the car was ours, like it was registered in our name. But the big problem is that when we did the transfer of ownership, this couple who had driven the car, Ben and Diana, into Ethiopia, they got the customs paper stamped at the border, right, in their name. But now we had to drive the car out of Ethiopia, but with a totally different set of paperwork, right? And so that was the like most like nerve-wracking thing. Like when we got to the border with Kenya, it was like, what are they going to say when the stamping in paperwork has like a totally different name, different passport, like different everything, like than ours, right, on our way out of the country. And it was, so that was like the big like paperwork challenge that we had, and that was the big worry. There are two land borders between Ethiopia and Kenya. There's only two. I mean, this is a huge border, right? These are two very large countries, and there's a huge border. There's only two ways to travel overland between those countries.
That's crazy.
So the like road system just isn't very developed in that part of Africa, and so the main border crossing is the one that Ben and Diana had crossed on their way, and north. So they came from Kenya into Ethiopia, and when we were going to head back south, that border was closed. It's called Moyale, I believe. Oh yeah, that border was closed. Yeah, right here. Because there was basically like a war going on. So there were a bunch of people shooting at each other. So that's the main like border crossing. So it was shut. Like we couldn't leave. Right. So the other land border is to the west, and it's called Omarate, and it's way over with the border with South Sudan and Kenya. And it's like, it is in the middle of nowhere. It is absolutely, you're coming into it. So that's Lake Turkana.
Omarate,
in Kenya. Yes, right. So there's it's not a road, it's a track. And it crosses over like right where South Sudan, which is also like at that time was in the middle of a war, and Kenya was like coming together. So that was the only like possibility. And you can see where you've zoomed it in here, like the road kind of stops at Omarate. Yeah. Right. And south of there, it's basically tracks. Right. Get to Omarate, and Omarate has the Customs and Immigration Office. So we showed up there, and our immigration was fine, right? Like we came into the airport, whatever, stamp in, stamp out, that's fine.
You're
we
the
got
same
the customs
people.
paperwork, right? We got the customs paperwork, and it's a little squeaky, right? And we'd already made the customs officer mad, actually, because when we pulled into town, there was a big gate across the village like entrance, and there was this guy just like in shorts and a t-shirt. He was like, hey, you need to show me like your paperwork and your passport, and you have to like give me your passport. I was like, you're just some dude on the side of the road. Like, I'm not giving you my passport, right? Like, I'm going to go to the like customs office. So can you let us through? So he was mad, and like we were mad, and like so he lifts up the gate, and we drive down to the customs office, and then there's nobody there, and we're like waiting and kind of sitting around and waiting. And so this guy comes walking down the road, and he doesn't have a uniform, he doesn't have anything, right? And so well, okay, sorry about that. didn't know, and so we kind of had a laugh about it afterwards. Like it kind of became a joke after the fact. But so he started like looking at our customs paperwork, and he's like, I don't know, this seems like really weird. Like, you came in on an airplane? Like, how are you coming out with this vehicle? Like, and we're like, oh, well, the vehicle was already here. It was like it was here,
Right.
And he's like, yeah, I can see that. And he's kind of flipping through it. He's looking, and he's like, this is really strange. He's like, who are these people? I'm like, well, these are our friends from the UK. And like, I don't know, we're trying not to lie, right? But also just kind of hedging our bets a little bit. He's like, look, I don't know. He's like, I gotta call the other border office. He's like, I don't understand like what's going on here. He's like, I gotta talk to my colleague over at Moyale, the big border post. We're like, oh man, here we go. We're really gonna be stuck. So, but we calls the other border, but it's closed, right? Because people are shooting at each other. There's nobody pick up the phone. So phone rings and rings and rings, and nobody answers. And he's like, well, I'm going to try his cell phone. So he tries his cell phone, rings and rings, nothing. So he's like, all right, well, whatever. He's like, have a good trip. He's like, be careful. He's like, there's a lot of like, there's a lot of like fighting going on down in Kenya. He's like, you got to like be really careful. So we're like, okay. So
I do love that government workers are the same everywhere. That like you make it just hard enough to where it's going to be a hassle, and then they're like, whatever, just gotta
whatever. Yeah, right. And there's just, and it's part of it is like this. It's all about your attitude too, right? When you show up in these contexts, It's like if you're going to be standoffish and angry and pissy and privileged, like they're going to make your life extremely difficult. They hold all the cards, right? But if you can be open and friendly and engaging and, laugh about stuff, you're going to have a lot easier time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And, a lot of these guys and these women, a lot of them are posted in these like remote areas. They have nothing to do. Like it's, it's the end of the earth. And, you're the sort of, fun for the day, right? Like there was nobody else. There was nobody else there except us. Like, nobody. And so, if you play the game, right? Like if you stay like not stressed about it, then it can be really fun.
Yeah.
So we drove out of Omarate through this like giant mud pit into this tribal area. It was like we'd driven back to the Neolithic, just like totally backwards in time. All these like tribal villages, really like undeveloped. We're just like bouncing along on the savannah, huge mountains in the distance in the west. We go skirt past the border with South Sudan, and we come across this big log. It's been like put in the middle of the road. And these guys come up with these huge like machine guns and AK-47s. And again, they're not wearing uniforms. They're just like dudes, right? And, same thing. Like we don't know who they are. Like maybe it's a paramilitary. Maybe it's like security forces. Maybe it's the police. Maybe it's guys with AK-47s. Like, you just don't know, right? And this went on for like most of the day. We'd have to stop, and another group of dudes with guns would come out, and they'd want to like know what we were doing there, and like, well, we don't know either. we're just driving through. And there's a weird thing too when you cross over from Ethiopia to Kenya in this part of the country. There's no customs or immigration on the Kenyan side, so you are driving like in this country like as a as a nobody because you haven't been stamped in, your vehicle hasn't gone through customs. You can't do that until you reach this large town that's, I don't know, 250, 300 miles from the border. So for that like stretch, you are all people can see is that you've stamped out of Ethiopia. Otherwise,
that's it.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just in no man's land.
You're a ghost at that point. Yeah.
Hence all those checkpoints and stuff. Probably.
Yeah. Right? Exactly.
That's probably part of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh.
Wow. And so and that was like the start of our trip, right? I mean, that was like the the kickoff. And then the rest of it was just, I think the cliche is that like, you go to Africa, it like changes you, right? It sort of gets in your, in your blood or in your bones. And, but it does. Like it's like no other place in the world. Like all these different countries are all so different. They all have different, landscapes and identities and people and culture and languages. And, they're all like so unique and so different. And each one is like more interesting and awesome than the other. And so we went through Ethiopia and Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda and Tanzania and Malawi and Zambia and Botswana. And, it was just this amazing privilege to drive this old rickety Land Rover, like, something, out of just, out of a dream in some ways. Right. And just bumping along these 2 tracks in the middle of nowhere, this, thrumming along with this old diesel. And it was great, I think, in a lot of ways because, we weren't in this like I wouldn't have done it any other way after the fact, right? Like it wasn't air conditioned. The doors were barely like hanging on. I was constantly having to like repair it and maintain it, like every other day.
I'm guessing not really lion proof.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The doors are like paper thin, right?
Yeah.
But it was like everywhere we went, everyone like loved it. Right. And, it just, we weren't like isolated, we weren't in a cocoon. We were sort of like, we were really like, I guess, as embedded as we could be in a lot of ways, right? When you have this sort of older car, it looks really rough. It's not a 200 series Land Cruiser. It's not like flashy. It's not, obviously modern. It's this, glorified tractor, right? And I think it made the experience all that much better because it just felt, I think for a lot of the communities we drove through, a lot of places we went, it was sort of, I don't know, we were maybe more accessible, right, as visitors, right? Partly because of the vehicle, because it was this old, broken.
It's hard to be threatening when you're fixing something on the side of the road.
Yeah, exactly, right. And repairing stuff was like, the best way to meet people. Right? You roll into these, these remote villages or even in large cities, and like, oh man, I need a wheel bearing. Like where do I get a wheel bearing? Right. And, someone's like, well, come with me. Right. Or, you're going to stay with us tonight, like while you, repair this wheel bearing. And, so, had we gone through this, whatever, 10,000 kilometer trip, with a Toyota, we never would have broken down and we never would have,
right.
Right.
Like just blazed through.
Right. But, in the end, the truck was a rock in the end. I mean, really, like there were little things that went wrong, stuff that we needed to address, problems to, troubleshoot, but it never blew up, like the Mitsubishi, right? Like it started every day, it ran every day. Like, we had to replace parts here and there. We broke a coil spring in Malawi, like at the top of a mountain. And we had to drive down the mountain on a broken front coil, all the way to the capital. It's like 200 miles, and we're all, lilting to one side, right?
Yeah.
And we get to the capital, and it's around Christmas time, and everything's closed, and there's no parts, or anything. Like, you can't really, you got to replace that. You can't. I mean, you can do things to get through, but that's a part you got to replace, right?
Yeah.
And so, but whatever. Like, a guy knows a guy who knows some other guy who can make a call, and whatever. A day later, a spring shows up, and you don't know where or why or how it came, but everyone there is like helping you, right? And it's all this big, problem to solve, right? And in the meanwhile, you're getting fed and being invited places and meeting people, right? So
it's so cool.
That's
just
amazing.
Like through the lens of the Land Rover, this old broken down truck, I think we had a very particular kind of experience that maybe we wouldn't have, in a Land Cruiser, right?
Yeah, or even a modern Range Rover, right, or something like that. Like it's
right.
It's like you said, it's like it's disarming to have someone show up and barely make it to you.
Right.
So how did you get it? How did you get it back? Did you export it here?
Yeah. So after this big long trip from Ethiopia, Botswana, we still had, 7-8 months left to go in our time there. So we drove it up to Mozambique and Swaziland and Namibia and all over.
That's awesome.
And at the end of the whole thing, we were like, we can't leave this truck behind. Like, we can't, we can't.
It's a family member at that point.
You're right, right. And we had gotten to know the people we bought it from. We got to know them really well, and then we got in touch with the people who drove it from England to Africa. We got to know them really well, and like got to know the story of this truck, right? And it had, its life and its personality, and we're like, we can't just leave it here, right? So yeah, we just started looking around, and the exportation process is a pretty it's a complicated one, and it's hard to do like on your own. And I spent months working on this. When we kind of made the decision, we're like, okay. And you mentioned Toto earlier. That's the name of the truck. The name is unironically named Toto, the Land Rover. So we're like, we gotta bring Toto home. So we finally found this company out of Switzerland, actually, that does a lot of these like sort of shipping processes for folks who are doing like overlanding, overland travel around the world. So again, the online car community, right, really like hooked us up with these folks, and they did all the paperwork, they did all the everything, and so when we were leaving Africa, we were flying out of Cape Town, so we brought the Land Rover to the port in Cape Town, and sat down with the export agent there and filled out the paperwork and gave him the keys, and we drove out to the dock and they put it in a container.
That's awesome.
Container went on a boat and it went to Singapore. So it went east.
What?
And then it got transferred onto another boat at the port of Singapore and ended up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And that's where we picked it up. So it went the long way.
Oh yeah,
it did.
Wow.
Yeah. And it took about 2 months. And part of it was like, I think we maybe paid a little less money because we didn't need it like immediately. Right. So like it was on the slow boat, really like, but yeah, we picked it up in Vancouver, BC, and drove it back, and now it lives in the snow in Montana. Probably
That's awesome.
Wonders what's going on. Yeah.
So did you have a hard time getting it registered here and stuff, or was that like?
No. So Montana's pretty like.
Right.
We don't have inspections. We don't have like
emissions.
Anything. So I had to have a sheriff's deputy come and inspect the VIN just to make sure that it matched the paperwork.
Yeah.
But with the 25-year import rule, it was well under that threshold, and we didn't even have to pay any duty when we crossed the border.
Oh,
So
wow.
when we showed up at the border in Washington, because we had to present our customs paperwork, right, and officially like import the truck into the United States. And the customs agent, he's like, well, how much did you guys pay for this car? I was like, well, I don't know, $6,000 or whatever we paid. He's like, all right. It was like, well, can I see it? And we're like, yeah, I mean, no, right? So he's kind of looked out the window or whatever. He's like, whatever. He's like, you don't owe anything on this. So again, like having the ugliest Land Rover in, North America was another benefit, don't have to pay the customs duties. So.
Yeah, he's thinking like this poor idiot just spent twice as much shipping this thing as he did paying for it. Yeah,
right, he's just going to tax some fees onto the guys with the R32 Skylines. It's fine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
He's just going to distribute that.
It'll all balance out.
Yes.
He has a cousin who works at the customs agents in Ethiopia.
Yeah,
in his shorts and sandals.
Same guy. Yeah, I got him on the cell phone, right?
Yeah. Just let him go. They're fine.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's insane.
It's like I said, and it's just, I don't know. I see some parallels like with what I did with David earlier this year. just like whatever.
Freaking send it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Just. Whatever happens, and sort of trust that humanity is generally good, I guess.
Right.
Which isn't always the case. But
I will say, I do think we've all been in this situation where we've had a meal on vacation or we've listened to a song on vacation and it's felt cool and magical, and then you try to replicate it at home and it doesn't feel that way. Was there any of that with the Land Rover? Does it feel as cool here, or does it feel differently here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think this sort of re-entry right back into just life in the United States. In a lot of ways, I think for both Julie and myself was difficult, right? That reverse culture shock thing, that re-entry thing. We had lived 2+ years or whatever, having this wild adventure, on the other side of the planet and in a place that we loved. Right. And, we're dying to go back. And so, I think, and then, you layer the coronavirus on top of all of it. And we really struggled. Right. But, the Land Rover was out there, and it was our connection back to, all of that. And, like I said, I pretty much drive it every day. I don't commute a lot. I work from home. So, I don't do it driving a lot, but, I drive it year round. It's this connection, and it puts a smile on my face, every time I get in it. Right. And, people love it. And I think it's in the same way, we were talking about VW Beetles, earlier. It's a cartoon car, it's a truck you draw when you're 6 years old. It's 2 boxes, right, and on these big wheels, and and it has this personality, right, and so it's sort of keeps that connection for us. It's every time I get in it, I'm there's still a bunch of sand in the bottom of the glove box from Namibia, right? And it really, it's a really, solid foundation for, not losing our minds over the last, year and a half. Right. And it's great. Yeah. And people love it. Everywhere I go, it's either what in the world is that? Or wow, that's amazing.
Right.
I can't believe, and then especially, when I say oh yeah, we just brought it here from Africa. Folks, I talk to people constantly, strangers everywhere, kids, love it. They're always coming up to it. And
that's fantastic.
And it's a great truck for Montana. The heater doesn't work, but,
Well, then it's not a great truck for Montana. You say that,
but yeah, and like I've taken it down to Arizona and Utah and bounced around, like in Canyonlands and down in the maze, like Idaho, and so it's had some good adventures like in North America too, and it's been amazing. So
that's great. That's so cool.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dave? I think we did a car show.
I
think we have like
speechless.
3 or 4 more car shows to do, but
yeah,
I think this was definitely a car show.
We're so thankful to talk to you, Steve. This is such. I'm just in awe. Like it's so great to hear your story.
Yeah, and I really appreciate being on, and I love to share these stories. I think partly because we really encourage. I mean, everyone we talk to, and it's part of my mission, I think, just in my work and writing for Overlander and other outlets, is like, go see things.
Right.
If you can do it, if it's open to you, don't let fear and uncertainty, hold you back. Right. Like the world is an amazing place. And, every time I can encourage people to do that, I try to, and if you can do it through a windshield, it creates a really interesting experience for you. And
for sure.
It's so it's really, I'm really glad to talk to you guys. And I think, especially since, the folks you've had on the show over the years, it's really cool to kind of be in with that group of folks like Doug DeMuro and Victoria and all these people. It's cool to sort of, and David, right? So yeah, shout out to David Obachowski for
absolutely
hooking us up. So
yeah. I mean, well, the real answer is that we're the lucky idiots, right? Who've just like gotten to meet people. So
yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Oh, if people want to find you on Twitter and join in the weird car Twitter conversation,
yeah, of course.
Yes.
I'm at MT, M as in mom, MT _ drift, as in like snowdrift or drifting a
drifty drifts
skyline.
We do need to talk about that real quick because like you did mention that your Land Rover is a cartoon car, right? And like Volkswagen Beetles are cartoon cars, right? You have Richard Scarry artwork on your banner, and that was some of the most impactful art to me as a child. Like that, I would get lost in those drawings as a kid, and I love them to this day, right? And like my wife's parents both had Volkswagen Beetles. Like she comes from a 2 Beetle household. Like this is fantastic. Like it's serendipitous. And MT _ drift on Twitter for sure.
Yeah. And I've the cars and trucks and things that go. I mean, that's it's on my shelf right now. It's an important book, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love the Richard Scarry stuff. It's so great. Yeah. And then overlander.com.
Yep. Right. So the Notebook is the blog. Do a lot of like sort of gear and product oriented stuff, but there's also a lot of like travel stories there from Africa and from Utah and from North America. So they give me some opportunity to stretch my legs on those topics as well. But I also write about fridges and roof tents and all the usual stuff. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Dave, if people like this mess, what should they do?
They should subscribe to our YouTube channel. They should do that. They should leave us a review on iTunes. If you see something that you'd like us to see, you should take a picture of it and text it to 720-515-1391, the Apex Adjacent Crisis line. But I mean, it's basically people just sending me vanity plates now for vanity plate license games. So
it's been a long time since we've had an actual voicemail on that number. It's all text.
Yeah. If you see a maniac out in the wild with vanity license plates that make no sense, go ahead and text it to that number and we'll talk about it for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Steve. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
And thank you, everybody else. We love you. Goodbye.